In 2023, the Surgeon General of the U.S. said something super fascinating, something I remember I read about. And what he did is he declared that loneliness was a public health endemic in the United States. And I'm like, that is a pretty strong statement for the Surgeon General speaking on behalf of the health for the entire country, saying loneliness is an epidemic. In fact, this idea of loneliness, the equivalent of how it affects us, is the same as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It's got some major health implications. Then we look at Generation Z, which is the generation, the younger people. This is the most connected generation that we've ever had. These kids have grown up with cell phones in their hand. They were born with iPhones, like coming right out of birth. They've got their iPhones, connected most ever. Yet this generation, statistically, is also the loneliest, the most anxious, and the most depressed. I think that the reality is we live in a mental health crisis in our society. And I would say this, I believe as a pastor, I believe that the mental health crisis is one of the greatest mission fields that us as a church, as Christians, have in the entire world. It is one of the greatest mission fields, and I will also say it's also one of the most largely ignored. There are people in our churches, people in our families, people in our community that are paying the price because we're not willing to have these conversations. In fact, I want you to think about your own life. Think about your circle, the people that you are connected to. Who do you know that is struggling with mental health issues? Or who do you know that has struggled with some of these issues? We're talking about depression. We're talking about anxiety. We're talking about sustained grief that will not lift. We're talking about panic attacks. We're talking about emotional crises. When you start thinking about your circle, who are the people that your mind goes to and like, oh, that person, that person. And what happens is when we have these people in our life, like we want to help. Like our heart is right. Like I want to be a help and a blessing and support. We're just not always sure how to do that. And maybe you're like me, where you want to help and you don't know what to do, so you just start saying stuff that ends up not being very helpful. You just spew out a bunch of information. I'm praying for you. Man, have you tried exercise? Just give it to God, right? Everything happens for a reason. How many of you have ever said those things? I have said those things, right? I've done that. But have you ever been struggling and you're on the receiving end of those phrases? They're just not very helpful, right? They don't make a huge difference in your struggle. Because what happens is, I think for many of us, there's a gap between our intentions and our impact. Our intentions are good, but our impact, not so much. And the reality is, it's costing the people around us. Which is why I think this is a conversation that as a church, we've got to enter into. We've got to enter into this conversation about mental health. In fact, as I've wrestled through my own struggles with mental health, I've had to wrestle through some of these things. And I tell you what, for the longest time is one of those things that I don't tell anybody I'm struggling with. It's one of those things that I feel like it drives an isolation, and I don't want to tell anybody else. And so I hold on to it and keep it in my head. And that's where it gets really dangerous, because it just marinates and runs circles in your head. It doesn't get lighter, it gets even heavier. So I've learned in my own struggles, there's two things that make a difference. Number one, I had to learn how to first acknowledge my struggle. Because again, what happens is when we fight alone, those things, they just get heavier. They don't get lighter, they get heavier. And so I've had to learn to acknowledge aloud to somebody to say, hey, I need you to know I'm struggling. This is where I'm struggling. Because there becomes this healing idea when we stop pretending, we stop faking, and acknowledge aloud where the struggle is. And the second thing I've had to learn is I've had to learn how to tell people what I need. Because what happens is when you are struggling and you tell somebody, they're like, well, let me fix you, right? You need to go exercise. You need to give it to God. Here's a Bible verse that'll make you all better. And I've had to learn how to say, you know what? I don't need you to fix me. I don't need you to try and tell me how to solve my problem. I just need your presence. I need you to know you're with me. I need to know you're not going to leave me. I need to know that you are here. And these things that I've had to learn, they're not natural, the things I've had to learn. But I think they're significant for us today as we enter into this conversation on mental health. We're starting a series today called Not Alone. And the whole idea behind this series is most of us, we know people in our lives. There's people in our family, there's people in our workplace, there's people in our school, our friends, there's people in our church that are struggling in these ways with mental health. And we want to help, our heart is right, but honestly, it's hard to know what we're supposed to do, what we're supposed to say, how we're supposed to act, how we're supposed to help them. And so we're going to, over the next couple of weeks, just kind of go through some scripture and look at some biblical wisdom on what it looks like for us to equip us how to help the people in our life who are struggling. And let me say this, before we dive into our text today, this series is awesome because it comes with a little backup. In a week and a half, Thursday, April 23rd at 6:30 here at the church, we've got two mental health counselors here at our church. Jaylene Stark and David Wells, and they're going to do a class for us. April 23rd, that's a Thursday, 6:30 here. And the idea of this class is let's not talk about theology. Let's not talk about theory. Let's get some real practical tools that professionals who do this for a living can give us so we can figure out how best to love on the people around us who are struggling. And let me just say, like don't miss this. This is such a resource for our church. Invite a friend to it. It's going to be a free thing here, 6:30. Love for you to be a part of that because I do think it is something that if the mental health crisis is not in your circle right now, man, I tell you what, it's probably not far. And these are things that as a church and as people who care about those around us, we need to embrace and be prepared for this conversation. Now, today we're looking at Job chapter 2, and I will say Job is such a fascinating book. And the reason I think it's so fascinating is we get to see the covers pulled back. We get to see the story behind the story. The story's about this guy named Job who goes through this horrendous suffering. But Job pulls the covers back, and we get to see that Satan is at work. And Satan leads these catastrophic blows upon Job. Satan causes Job to lose his children and his wealth. Then Satan goes as far as taking his physical health. And Job finds himself suffering. Suffering to the point that he is sitting in an ash heap. And we see ash heap, but the mindset should be he's sitting in the county dump. Okay, he's got boils all over his body. He is sitting at the county dump because his suffering is so bad. Where else do you go? Right? That's where he feels he's belong. He's devastated. Now, if you are familiar with the book of Job, you know that his friends are going to come in and his friends are going to make things worse. They give these long speeches of all this wisdom that they have, and their speeches become unhelpful and often pretty wrong. But I love this because in Job chapter 2, before his friends ever say a word, there's this beautiful and powerful couple of verses that is all about the ministry of presence. And I love these verses. It is such a powerful thing. And as we enter into this conversation about mental health, listen, I want you to know it is more important that we show up and less that we speak up. That is what the ministry of presence is all about. So we're going to look at 3 points this morning. Number 1, they came. Simply that. Verse 11, Job chapter 2, verse 11. It says, when Job's friends heard of all of this evil that had come upon them. I love that the Bible chooses to call this evil. All these things that have happened to Job, it calls it evil. And I emphasize this because I don't think, when we think about suffering, I don't think we think about it on those terms. Like we think suffering, oh, it's a consequence of sin. We think suffering is just a part of life. And sometimes those things are true. But again, we got to see the curtain pulled back. We got to see what we don't normally see. That there was an adversary behind these things that had happened to Job. There was Satan, an enemy, who was trying to bring this suffering upon him. And it reminds me of Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12, that says, Ephesians 6 says, we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against rulers and authorities and cosmic powers over this present darkness, against spiritual forces in evil in the heavenly places. There's a spiritual war happening behind the scenes that we can't see. And I want to be careful here. I want to be careful because let's clarify, like not every mental health struggle is a spiritual attack. I think if we were to say that, that would be over-spiritualizing things, and that would be harmful to many of us in this room. But I also want us to understand that nothing happens to us. Nothing happens to us in a spiritual neutral world. We don't live in a spiritual neutral world. There's a cosmic battle of good versus evil, of Satan versus God, that is real, and it is happening behind the curtains that we can't even see. And so I love that the text starts out and says they saw the evil that had come upon Job. And it's significant what his friends are going to do, because the story isn't just about friends who show up. His friends are pushing against something bigger and deeper than that. So it says in verse 11, when they heard of all the evil had come upon him, they each came from his own place, these different friends, and they made an appointment together to come to him. They hear what's happened to Job. Simply hear what's happening. And what did they do? They came. They didn't wait. They didn't wait for Job to call. They didn't wait for an invitation. They didn't send the text messages like, man, I heard what happened. Let me know if you need anything. Let me know if you need anything. No, they simply heard that the friend was struggling, and they moved towards him. They moved towards the pain. Do you understand, like most people disappear when life gets heavy? But as a people of God, we've got to be the people that draw near to those who are suffering. And don't miss this. Notice his friends, they didn't run Job through a worthiness filter, right? They didn't evaluate as to whether Job's suffering was valid or not. And maybe not all of us, but there's some of us in this room, when we hear someone is struggling, we're going to evaluate, well, did they bring this on themselves? Is it their fault? Oh, well, they're suffering because this has happened, and they just need to deal with the consequences of their choices. If they made better choices, and we would never say it out loud, but we have a filter that often shapes if and how we respond. But not Job's friends. There's no evaluation. There's no conditions, because love moves towards the pain without ever asking if the person deserves it or not. That's what Job's friends are doing. They hear about Job, and they're moving towards the pain. And look, they come with this intention, verse 11. It says, they came to show him sympathy and comfort him. They came to comfort him. They didn't come to fix him. They didn't come to solve the problems. They didn't come to explain why everything was happening, to give a theological framework. They came simply to be present, simply to grieve with him. Again, like honestly, like how many of us, that's our first move when somebody is suffering in a difficult way? Many of us, like we pull back a little bit, right? Because it's messy. It's difficult. We don't know what to say, so we keep a little bit of distance. But this is why the ministry of presence moves towards the pain. In fact, this is why I love the friends. They didn't wait to be invited. Because what we do, what many of us do, is we see someone struggling, and so we send the text message. Hey, let me know if you need anything. And we feel good about it, right? Man, if they need something, man, I'll be there in a heartbeat. Just let me know. Just let me know. But do you know how unhelpful that text message is? Because when you say, just let me know if you need anything, you're looking at the person who is suffering, who's in the ash heap, who is so defeated. And you are putting it on them to organize their own help. Right? You are taking this person who is struggling and you are expecting them to, number one, figure out what they need. Number two, to find the words to ask for it. And number three, to find the courage to actually reach out. Do you know how unrealistic and unhelpful that conversation is? This person is suffering and struggling. They can't figure out what they need, let alone find the courage to ask. But here we are. Oh, just let me know if you need anything, and I feel really good because I'm doing something. Job's friends, they don't ask. They don't send the text message, let me know if you need anything. No, they heard that Job was suffering, and they went. And those of us who are going to love the people in our lives who are struggling well, this is our model. Not to wait for the invitation, not to wait till we got it figured out, not to wait till we have the right words, but simply to show up and to give ourselves. Number one, they came. Number two, they saw. Listen to this, verse 12. It says, when they saw him from a distance, they did not recognize him. And they raised their voices and wept, and they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads towards heaven. Notice, these friends are Job's closest friends. They're the people that have lived with him through life, through thick and thin. They probably grew up together. And Job's suffering is so great that his friends look at them and they're like, we don't even recognize who you are. That is what suffering does. And what they do is so significant. Because they look at Job and they see him suffering, they see him disfigured, they see him all these things. And again, there's no staying back in a safe distance. They're not just calling out encouragement, hey, get yourself better, buddy. No, it says they showed up and they wept with him. And they tore their robes. And they threw dust on their heads. And what they're doing, they're entering into Job's grief with him. They're entering it into the grief with him. Again, the book of Romans, chapter 12, it tells us what we're supposed to do. Scripture says, weep with those who weep and rejoice with those who rejoice. Which means when we see somebody in that moment where they're struggling and suffering, like we don't stand back and just feel sorry for them. No, we weep with them. We enter into the grief with them. We get down with them into it. In fact, there's a pastor and an author by the name of Henry Nouwen. And he wrote about how he had a friend who was dying. And Henry went and sat with his friend for a couple of hours. And Henry didn't say much to him. But after the fact, someone else came to visit Henry's friend. And Henry's friend said, that was the most comforting experience of my life. Not because Henry said anything wise, not because he solved the situation, made things better, but because he was willing to go down into the darkness rather than standing at the top and calling his friend out of it. You see, the image of this is when we've got that friend down there suffering and struggling. We're not up at top calling them, hey, come on up here. It's better up here. No, the image is actually going down into the suffering with that person. And it is so powerful. Listen, going down into someone's pain is far better effective than reaching down and trying to pull them up. Like that is such a visual for us to grasp, that going down into somebody's pain, grieving with them, weeping with them is so much more effective than saying, hey, just come on up here. Just get better. It's Job's friends. They're not standing above. They're not trying to lift Job out. They're going down to where Job is. They're weeping with him. They're tearing their robe. They're throwing dust on their heads. They're saying, I'm here, and I'm with you, and you're not alone. Let's do this together. Now, Job's suffering was impossible to miss, right? His friends walk up and they're like, hey, we don't even recognize you because of how great your suffering is. But we're in this conversation about mental health. And mental health struggles don't typically work like that. It's not always visible, right? Oftentimes in the mental health struggle, they're not sitting in an ash heap. There's no visible outward expression of the struggle. There's no visible wounds. Chances are there's someone right next to you, whether that be in this room, whether this be in your family, whether this be at your workplace. There are people right next to you that are in the middle of a crisis that you cannot see. And if we're going to love people who are in the middle of these kinds of struggles, we've got to learn to look differently. Because the text says, the wording was, when they saw from a distance. Now, this word saw is not a casual glance. It is a deliberate, sustained look. They're paying attention. They're looking for what they're missing out on. And if we're going to love the people around us who are struggling with mental health, it's going to require us to have the same kind of intentionality where we're looking, we're paying attention, we're in it. And what are we looking for? Well, let me tell you, you don't have to be an expert to see the signs. But if you look and pay close attention, you'll notice a few things. Here's a few things you might look for. You might look for a change in behavior. Hey, somebody, man, they were a Seahawks fan, like a good God-loving person, and they became a 49ers fan. Something is wrong, clearly. A change in behavior. You look for isolation. Somebody who has been reliable keeps canceling on you. Somebody who is always easy to communicate with, and pretty soon they're ghosting you. That's isolation. You should pay attention for that. Look for the person who says, I'm fine, I'm good. But you look at the look in their eyes, you look at their posture, their energy, it doesn't match their words. Hold up, you say you're fine, but I see that look in your face, man, you don't look fine. You have to be looking and paying attention. You begin to look for anger that doesn't make sense, right? Anger that doesn't make sense, because sometimes depression looks like sadness, but oftentimes depression, it looks like somebody having a short fuse, easily overwhelmed. You look for this exhaustion, like not tired from being busy, but this deep exhaustion that sleep can't fix. You look for numbing. Somebody's increased in their drinking, increased in their scrolling, they're overworking, they're overeating. A sign that they are escaping what's happening internally. See, the idea is not to give you a checklist and you just run through the checklist. The idea is, are we paying attention to the people around us? Are we seeing the way that Job's friends saw? Are we willing to notice, man, it sure seems like you're struggling? Most of us will miss the signs not because they're not there, but simply because we're not looking very closely. So Job's friends, they came, they saw, and number 3, they sat. Verse 13, they sat with him on the ground for 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word. They saw that his suffering was very great. Can you imagine? Can you imagine for 7 days and for 7 nights, not a single word? Now, most of us, when we have that silence, it's awkward, right? That silence, like we squirm, we can't wait to say something because the silence is weird, so we say all sorts of weird little things just because we don't like the silence. It's awkward. And I tell you what, like, I'm a pastor. I'm a guy who's supposed to know what to say in all those settings. It is such a challenge, which is why I love that his friends came and didn't say a word. And this isn't because they didn't care. This isn't because they were trying to avoid a hard conversation. It's more powerful than that. Because what Job needed wasn't an explanation. It wasn't a Bible verse. What Job needed was presence. What Job needed was a friend. In fact, we're a part of the Acts 29 Church Planting Network. And I've been in this cohort for several years with a number of pastors. And there's this crazy guy named Jim. And Jim is like ahead of our cohort. And every time we get together, Jim makes us do these weird exercises. Like one time, he's like, I want you to pretend that you're kelp. So I'm standing in front of another guy. We're about 2 feet apart. And he's like, just pretend you're kelp. And so we're swaying. And I'm like, this is the weirdest thing. I'm at this pastor's cohort, and I'm dancing with some other guy that I just met. It was weird. But I remember this one time we got together, and Jim said, we're going to do something different today. We're going to do something that's called Shiva, which is a Jewish practice of sitting in silence with somebody who is grieving. And so what we did is we went through the room and we shared something that we're struggling with. We shared something we're grieving. And then to identify with that pain, to identify with that grief, we didn't say anything. We just sat in that moment for 45 minutes in silence. And I tell you, it wasn't awkward. It wasn't avoidance. It was reverence. It was a reverence in saying, listen, what you're going through is so heavy. Man, my words aren't enough. In fact, that's what Shiva is. Shiva is saying, your pain is too big for my words, but I'm with you, and I'm not going anywhere. I'm here with you. And I tell you what, that weird 45-minute exercise was so powerful. Just to have somebody sit with me in the weight of whatever it is we're carrying, not to solve it, not to tell me how to fix it, but just to say, hey, I'm with you. Silence is not failure. Silence is faithfulness. In fact, there's a guy named Jay Biley who understood this. Jay Biley was a pastor who ended up burying 3 of his kids. Like, I can't even imagine that amount of loss, that amount of grief of having to bury 3 of your children. And Jay wrote a book, and he talked about how one of his friends came and tried to encourage him, right? He was like, hey, God has a purpose in this. God hasn't abandoned you. Here's some Bible verses, and here's hope beyond the grave. And he gave all this encouragement of things that Jay already knew. And Jay said, my friend kept talking, and I couldn't wait for him to leave. And then he had another friend who came, who didn't say a word, who listened when Jay spoke, who prayed softly and left after an hour or two. And Jay said, I was so moved and comforted that I hated to see him go. Both friends had the same good intentions, but incredibly different impact. And the difference is not theology, it's not knowledge, it's not the right words. The difference is Shiva. The difference is a willingness to say, my words are not big enough for what you're going through, but I'm here. I'm with you. I'm not going anywhere. Now, again, the book of Job, if you get to the end of the book, you're going to see God, he's going to rebuke his friends. These 3 friends, God's going to rebuke them for what they say in chapters 4 through 37. But God doesn't rebuke them for what they do in chapter 2, in this ministry of presence. You could say that Job's friends, they got it right until they opened their mouths, right? So the question becomes, all right, Pastor Kevin, what is this all about? What are you trying to get across this morning? Here's our summary. Here's our big idea. And I want us to hear this very clear. Your presence, your simple presence is often so much more powerful than your answers. We show up and we're like, man, let me explain it for you. Here's a Bible verse. Let me encourage you. Listen, your simple presence is often so much powerful than any words that you can share. I believe that. I think that is what you see in this chapter in the ministry of presence. But there's two things I want to acknowledge before we get to our application. First is that the ministry of presence is where love starts, but it's not where love ends. The ministry of presence is the foundation. It's not the ceiling. And so next week, we're going to continue this conversation, and we're going to talk about the next step, about love that actually carries somebody who is struggling. But we started here today because order matters. If we don't get the ministry of presence right, then none of the other things necessarily are going to matter. So let's get this right. Our presence before our words. And number two, hey, when we start talking mental health struggles, like these things are often so incredibly complex. And I just want to say, if you or someone around you is struggling with these things, let me say there's a lot of wisdom in getting some expert help. I'd love to help you find a counselor to walk through some of these things with you. Because I'll say, I believe presence is powerful, but sometimes your presence means helping someone find professional help. Listen, talking to a counselor is not weakness, it's healing, it's wisdom. So let's just clarify that. And if that's you, come and talk to me. I'd love to help you get connected to some people that can help walk through this with you professionally. Application, we got 2 points of application. We'll pray. Number one, let's acknowledge our own struggle. Again, we're having this mental health conversation about trying to help other people, and that's good. But there are some of us that have come into this room today, and we've been faking fine for a long time, right? We show up, and we're like, I'm good. And nobody knows the suffering and the struggling that you are carrying and the heaviness. And you justify, and you're like, well, I don't know who to talk to. I don't know what to say. I don't know where to go. And we're like, you know what? I'm worried because if I share my struggle, man, people are going to judge me, especially in church. Why is church the place that we judge people more than anyone else? Isn't that crazy? Or we say, well, I'm a person of faith. I'm a Christian. I'm not supposed to struggle with this sort of thing. I'm not supposed to feel this way. Or we say, well, I tried to talk to somebody once, and it didn't go good. They made a mess of it. And so you have carried this pain, this struggle in your own for such a long time. Let me speak to you for a moment. Listen to this. Listen, you are not less faithful if you struggle with some of these things, right? You are not a problem to be solved. Your faith is no less genuine because you struggle with whatever the mental health struggle is. But I want you to hear this. You don't have to hold on to this alone. In fact, when we planted Restoration Church, man, that was never what Restoration Church was about. Which is why our family values, one of our family values is we celebrate progress, not perfection. Which means, and I want you to hear this, we welcome people who are struggling with the heaviness of life. We welcome people that aren't okay yet. You belong here exactly as you are. And if you're like, man, I've been struggling with this and I don't know where to start, my encouragement, start here. Start here. Come and talk to me. Let's find someone who can walk alongside with you in the middle of whatever it is you're going through. Again, our value, one of our other values is we're people that we belong together. Which means you don't have to suffer and struggle alone. There's people who will simply come and say, let's walk through this together. But for the rest of us, number one, acknowledge your own struggle. Let's have that conversation. And for the rest of us, how do we practically live out this ministry of presence? And here's your application. Number two, reframe your instincts. Reframe your instincts. Again, most of us, right? Our heart is right. We want to help the people in our lives. We want to help our families. We want to help these people. We're just not always sure how to do that. And if we're going to practice this idea of the ministry of presence, it's going to require that we change some of our natural instincts, right? So we're going to reframe our normal instincts. And what that means is we're going to stop waiting to be asked. We're going to stop waiting for the invitation. Because a person in the ash heap, the person that is struggling, man, they're not going to organize their own rescue. They can't figure out what that is. So we need to stop saying, let me know if you need anything. And we need to stop waiting to be asked and just show up. Just be present. Just go. In fact, just super practical. Like as you start thinking about the people in your circle, the people who are struggling, can you identify who that person is? Can you picture them in your mind? Here's what I want you to do. I want you to send the text. Don't wait. Today, I want you to send the text message and simply say this. Say, hey, I'm thinking about you. You don't have to respond, but I want you to know I'm here. That is powerful. And as we enter this conversation about not alone and helping those with mental health struggles, listen, that might be the text message you need to send today that will change somebody's life. Don't wait. Don't wait for an invitation. Just go and do. Number one, we've got to reframe our instinct and stop being wait to asked. And when we do show up, number two, we need to resist the urge to fix things. Because we show up and we're like, well, what do I do? And you just start mouth garbage, word garbage, throw up, word throw up. I can't, I speak for a living. Whatever, and if we just start saying stuff because we don't know what to do. Listen, before you give advice, before you share that Bible verse, before you say, hey, let me solve your problem, just be present. Just say, let's do Shiva. Let's just sit and be present together so you're not alone. And you know what? I've learned that when someone shares something difficult with you, they share their struggle, they share, hey, this is where I'm at. The best thing you can do is say, listen, thanks for sharing that with me. You didn't have to. Thank you for sharing that with me. I'm glad you did. And then you ask this question right after that. You say, do you want me to listen, or are you looking for input? Because that question is giving them control. Hey, I don't need input right now. I just need your presence. Awesome. You are free to practice the ministry of presence simply by clarifying where they're at and what they're looking for. Now, resist the urge to fix everything and simply give people your presence. And if we're going to reframe our instincts, the last thing, it means we're going to not pull back when things get long. Because when the crisis hits, everybody shows up. When the crisis hits, everybody sends a text message. They bring meals. They just show up. Hey, I'm checking on you. How you doing? But after a week or two, people just go back to their life. But when we're talking about mental health struggles, these things are often long processes. And when we go back to our lives, that person is still sitting in the ash heap. They're still sitting, suffering, but now they're sitting all alone. And I'll say this, staying is a lot harder than just showing up. But it is so much more important. And again, as we're talking about how do we equip us to minister to the people around us, to love them well, man, if you think about that person, you know, man, they've had this long struggle. But like, here's what I will tell you to do, right? Put a recurring reminder on your phone with their name every 2 weeks. Every 2 weeks, simply to check in. Not to fix their problem, but to say, I've not forgotten you. I'm here. Let me close with this. It's just this ministry of presence from Job's friends. Man, it is such a beautiful gift. And it's so simple. They came, they saw, they sat. Like, our world is lonelier than it has ever been. And what we're talking about, all these things that our world struggles with, depression and anxiety and burnout and grief that doesn't lift. It is everywhere around us. And most people are carrying these things alone because they don't think anybody's gonna stay. You can be the person that stays. You can be the person that has an impact. You don't need a psychology degree. You don't need a theology degree. You just need to show up. You need to look them in the eye and say, my words are not enough, but I'm here and I'm not going anywhere. And I'll say this, in a world that is so incredibly lonely, this might be the most Christ-like thing that you and I can do all week long. It's simply to say, my words are not enough, but I'm here. And the reason we can do this is because someone did this for us. Jesus didn't wait to be invited into our mess. He came. He saw and he sat. He sat in a manger. He sat in a cross. He sat in a tomb. He descended into our suffering. So we wouldn't have to be alone in it. And we can love others because he first loved us. And the same love that we receive from him is the same love that we bring into someone else's ash heap. Let's pray.